man from having his body cryogenically frozen. Breaking news when it happens. Our next scheduled update at 1:30. I'm Wayne Nelson.
We're trying something different for afternoons on News Talk 770. Here's Andrew Lawton. You can talk to Andrew by calling 403-974-8255 or text at 770-770. Andrew Lawton, guest hosting on News Talk 770.
Good afternoon, Calgary. Welcome to Afternoons on News Talk 770. My name's Andrew Lawton, guest hosting this week, and we've got a great show planned for this afternoon. We're going to be chatting just after 2 o'clock about mandatory calorie counts on menus. Yes, I know the nanny state runneth amok, but it's happening, and, well, the jury is not even really still out about whether or not it works. As a matter of fact, the jury has pretty much concluded that it doesn't work, yet governments are still trying to embrace that. So we'll be chatting about that just after 2 o'clock. Coming up just after 2:30, we're going to be talking about online gambling, which financial and business experts are saying is a pretty solid investment now, but some people are still concerned about the community implications of it. And coming up in just half an hour, we're going to be chatting about a recent report, or a column rather, in the National Post, talking about the fact that sex ed, in the eyes of the author, should be something that includes discussions about marriage. So we'll be chatting about that just after 1:30. But I wanted to begin talking about something. This is a very, very real story, and even though it's not necessarily on the top of minds for most Canadians or Albertans, there is a growing movement in Canada that is trying to advocate for what's known as cryonics. Now, this is something that I'm going to try to get a more holistic understanding of with the guest I'll introduce in just a moment here, but it's basically people that want to have their body frozen because they want to potentially be brought back to life later on. I mean, that's basically what a lot of people are using as motivation. There's been a myth going on, an urban legend of sorts going around for the last, 40 years or 50 years that Walt Disney was apparently, frozen cryonically underneath Disneyland or Disney World. That's not actually true, but a lot of Canadians and Americans are still embracing this. And there's currently a lawsuit going through in British Columbia by the Lifespan Society of BC, along with a man by the name of Keegan McIntosh, who would like to be frozen. But in BC, it's not as easy as simply saying that you want to do it and it's your body. Joining me on the line is Carrie Wong. She's the president of the Lifespan Society of BC, one of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit. Carrie, it's great to have you on the program. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
So let's first off start with, I think, a question that needs to be cleared up here, because this is something that a lot of people, I don't really think, understand outside of, sci-fi movies or Austin Powers. I mean, what is cryonics?
Well, cryonics is a practice of preserving a human body at very low temperatures after legal and clinical death. And cryonicists preserve their bodies from decay in hope that medical science will advance to a future point when their bodies can be resuscitated and restored to health without compromising their memories, personalities, and identities. So the use of cryonics is predicated on the possibility that currently untreatable medical conditions, including the process of aging itself, could be treated in the future at the time of the removal from cold storage. The procedure is complicated. Do you want me to go into that a little bit?
Well, let's get to that later on as well. I mean, it's 1 o'clock, so we don't necessarily want to get people too burdened down by the technical details. But I wanted to ask more about the business side of things, because as I understand it, there's no one in Canada that is offering this service in Canada, correct?
Yes, this is correct.
Okay, so if someone who is Canadian wants to do this, what's the process looking like for them?
Well, basically, they have to sign up with a U.S. company. There's 2 established U.S. organizations that have been operating legally for over 40 years. There's Alcor Life Extension Foundation in Scottsdale, Arizona, and Cryonics Institute in Michigan.
Okay. And what's the cost of this procedure?
Oh, it's actually affordable to the middle class, which is something that most people get wrong. They think it's only like millionaires or billionaires that can afford it. But if someone signs up, like at a young age, they just pay into a universal life insurance policy. For example, someone my age would be paying, if they don't have any major health problems, would be paying $60 a month into a life insurance policy and get preserved So there's quite a big price range between Cryonics Institute and Alcor Life Extension Foundation. For Alcor Life Extension Foundation, the neuro patients, so just the head, costs about $100,000 USD.
Okay.
While CI does full body for $27,000.
Okay. I mean, $60 a month. I mean, I pay more on a phone bill, so you can't really necessarily take issue with the cost there. So I want to get into the differences from province to province about the way the law views cryonics, because I think a lot of people might not necessarily realize that for example, governing bodies for funeral homes and crematoriums, et cetera, those are all provincially regulated, and the rules and nuances and licensing change from province to province. Is there a national law that deals with cryonics, or is it always different depending on your province?
I'm not aware of any province that has a law specifically targeting cryonics because it's such a rare thing to come up, legally speaking. I hope it becomes more popular in the future, and there's obviously going to be more ethical dilemma in the future. But in terms of actual laws that try to regulate cryonics, BC is the only jurisdiction that I'm aware of that does this.
So what is the law that's really causing issues so much so that this needs to be brought to the BC Supreme Court?
It's part of the Section 14 of the Cremation, Interment, and Funeral Services Act. So a person may not offer for sale or sell an arrangement for the preservation or storage remains that's based on A, cryonics, B, irradiation, or C, any other means of preservation or storage by whatever name called, that is offered or sold on the expectation of the resuscitation of human remains at a future time. So basically what that means is that it's not possible for a BC company to offer this service to a BC resident. And the problem with this is that normally cryonicists deal with funeral directors to start cooling down their body and start the whole process of cryopreservation, and also transport the body into the U.S. to get a more thorough preservation. But it's been hard to deal with professionals, coroners or funeral directors or whoever we need to deal with because of the chilling effect of this law on the books.
Yeah, and it does seem like, based on what you're saying earlier, this is only targeting cryonics generally, because the second you bring in words like the expectation of future resuscitation, I don't really think of anything else that comes to mind anyway that falls under that banner.
Yeah, and also it's just something that is, we're not sure what they mean by the expectation of resuscitation of human remains, so it seems like they're trying to regulate something that they don't fully understand, and that's where the big problems come in. Like, we don't have a problem with, regulating an exaggeration of the expectation of resuscitation, but none of the established cryonics organizations have this. They have very lengthy cryonics arrangements agreements that go through all the things that could go wrong and just buyer beware. The whole document is this like grueling 30 page document saying, this might not work for this reason, and it's almost like most people wouldn't even be able to get through the paperwork to sign up in the first place. It's really, there's no exaggeration whatsoever in cryonics arrangements.
Now, is there anything in the law, I just want to make sure I understand this, because you're right, this is not something that comes up every day. Is there anything in the law that prevents a BC resident from procuring the service from one of the U.S. companies you mentioned?
No, but from a legal point of view, Alcor would not be able to advertise or offer for sale their services within BC, so technically their website should not, but nobody, is going to force it to that amount of level where they ban the website of U.S. companies from BC. I don't think that would be quite an overreach, I think.
But there would be, based on the interpretation of the law that you and your fellow plaintiffs have really seen this, the company wouldn't be able to theoretically go to British Columbia to pick up someone's remains.
We're not sure. It's just ambiguous, and we hope that this filing this notice of civil claim can shed some light on what they actually mean by, legally speaking, from discussing this issue with our lawyer, Jason Grotto, it's just sort of vague. The law is very vague, and it's an overreach, we believe. because I think that an individual has the right to do with their body whatever they want after they've been legally declared dead. I mean, who should tell me what to do with my body, or Keegan what to do with his body after they're passed away?
And that's where we get into what I think is the crux of the argument here, which is, who owns your body once you die, basically. We have to take a quick break here, but I want to continue this discussion with Carrie Wong, president of the Lifespan Society of British Columbia, when we come back here on Afternoons on News Talk 770. Curious what you think about this. Is it an overreach for the government to say you can't arrange to have yourself frozen pending developments in the future that might be able to bring you back to life? It sounds like a concept that's a little bit theoretical, but hey, there's a company offering this. There's somewhere a warehouse of people frozen waiting to be brought back to life. 403-974-8255 is my number, or toll free at 1-800-563-7770. You can also text me to 770-770. I'm Andrew Lawton. We'll be right back.
Well, something got me shaking, my mind was racing, pacing the room. I don't know, but I think I found a piece of...
Afternoons here on News Talk 770. I'm guest host Andrew Lawton. 770-770 is the number to which you can shoot me a text, or you can call me at 403-974-8255 or 1-800-563-7770. The idea of cryonics is understandably one that I don't really think it is going to resonate with a huge number of people. I, to be honest, think most people of faith see death as not the end because your spirit lives on. And for that reason, having the expectation or the desire for immortality seems to be a bit of a lost cause. For other people, I think the idea of immortality is a little bit frightening. Who wants to be around in the world forever? Especially if you die older. I mean, then you'd be brought back to life as what, an 80-year-old for the rest of your life? No, I mean, this is these are the questions. I think when we break it down, though, this is more of a question of who has the right to decide what happens to your body after you die. And the libertarian in me thinks that's more relevant than the question of whether or not you would decide to have yourself frozen. I'm very curious about your answers to that. I'm joined by Carrie Wong, the president of the Lifespan Society of BC. Carrie, you mentioned earlier that this is a question of vagueness in the law, and I guess what I would ask you is, given that it has been apparently untested and to the point where the court hasn't needed to decide on this, why is it important that your organization weigh in on this case when, up until this point, there hasn't really, as I understand it, been an example of someone being blocked from trying to make arrangements from British Columbia?
Well, this law actually does have an effect because, as I talked about before, traditionally, cryonicists have to make arrangements with funeral directors to transport their bodies to the U.S. company. And funeral directors have the experience and the legal right to transport a body across the border. And with this law against the sale or offer to sell arrangements for cryonics, that can be interpreted as, making a cryonics arrangement with a funeral director because it's part of the whole process of cryonics. So funeral directors don't necessarily want to deal with us, and that's where the Lifespan Society of British Columbia comes in, because we intend to offer some aspect of cryonics arrangements to Keegan McIntosh. So if we win this lawsuit...
I'm Wayne Nelson in the News Talk 7.
Now, your organization, though, I mean, has really tried to advocate for this and a wider acceptance of it. Why is that necessary? I mean, why is that something that you really think more people should embrace?
Well, basically, we want to articulate our right to control our bodies after death, and we want to advocate for individual choice in end-of-life matters. And also, we want to have a standby service in British Columbia, and this law clearly prevents us from making one.
Carrie Wong joins me, president of the Lifespan Society of BC. Really appreciate your time this afternoon, Carrie. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if you want to deal with the discussion based on a level of rights, go wild. I don't know why the government in BC, especially given that jurisdictions outside of BC really don't seem to be weighing in on this that much. I mean, Alberta doesn't have a law on this, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario. As far as Canada and even North America, it looks like BC is the only government that has specifically blocked this. So for the one person a year in Alberta that maybe says, hey, we are looking at wanting to do this, my wife and I, we want to have ourselves frozen, and you know what, that's just going to be some beautiful scene, it's just, let's just go wild, let's have a frozen themed funeral. Someone can sing Let It Go. We'll have Idina Menzel leading the procession. Let's have some fun with it here. But I don't get why these cases really don't, I think, shine a light on why government's even weighing in to certain things in general. I mean, look, was there really this rampant epidemic in British Columbia that needed to be addressed here? Now, Dan has a better end-of-life plan. He says he wants to be encased in frozen fat-free yogurt, and oh dear, I'm not even going to read the rest of it, but it has to do with Victoria's Secret models. A couple of people are questioning the medical efficacy of this and whether or not it would happen. One person says here, I don't see cryonics of an issue. Supreme Court says we have the right to life, liberty, happiness, and now death with legal suicide. So what could possibly be an issue with resurrection? Yeah, it's the right to life, just for the second try. Aziz, go ahead.
Yeah, there's many angles you can tackle the subject. The first one is, like, for the past 2,000 years, all of our forefathers have been buried, and the people that buried them, believed that they would be resurrected one day for eternal life, right? So,
yeah, that's just less of a physical resurrection. But no, you're right.
No, they believed in an eternal, physical, spiritual resurrection at some point. All of our forefathers believed that. Various cultures and such and such. But the only other explanation is to say that British Columbia has some fascist tendencies. For saying cryogenics is wrong because they just felt like it.
Well, and that's the thing. And I mean, it's making a law based on a problem that I don't think anyone can point to actually existing.
Exactly.
Yeah, appreciate the call very much, Aziz. And as a matter of fact, after 3 o'clock today, we're going to be chatting with a Vancouver psychiatrist who was someone who filed an affidavit with the BC Supreme Court case that led to the ban on assisted suicide. And that'll be coming up after 3 o'clock. But I think what's going on right now in Canada about assisted suicide speaks to the fact that, look, more than any other point in history, Canadians have the ability to choose what's happening to and inside and about and everything to do with their bodies, more than ever before. And that comes with issues when you're alive, sexual freedoms, liberties, etc. And also it factors in when you're dealing with something like what happens when you die. And one person says, why do I care what happens in BC? Well, because it has national implications about whether or not you have the right to do something with your body when you die, whether or not the government has the right to tell you shouldn't. Now, I think there are other people here that would say the government doesn't have any right to block this. There are other people that would say the companies that are offering these things have no right to be playing God. And to be honest, as a Christian, that's how I see this as well. It's an issue of playing God. I am not comfortable with it. But I also don't think my discomfort should block other people who are comfortable with it, other people who don't seem to care, from making the decision in their own lives. I just think we have to sort of deal with the functional problem here. Like, I would just hate to be, walking around and you just randomly walk into the freezer room where they're holding these people. I don't know how many people there are. Like, I'm picturing like that scene in Avatar where you go in and everyone's in those, tall vertical glass columns and you just sort of like connected to wires and suspended there. Maybe that's just, wishful thinking. It probably looks a lot less like that and more like some, industrial meat locker. But at the end of the day, this is going to be an issue that I think will have, despite how few people are impacted by it, very significant implications when we look at what rights you have over your own body. And I think one of the preeminent thoughts of this discussion is from one person, just texted me a moment ago, said, this reminds me of the saying, a fool and his money are soon parted. Yeah, if I were the, son or daughter of someone that had made cryonics arrangements, I'd be wondering, wow, that was $100,000 that could have been in the will for me. That's now going towards, keeping dad in a freezer. In any case, we got to take a quick break here for news. When we come back, we're going to be talking about sex ed. Peter John Mitchell will join me, a researcher with the Institute of Marriage and Family Canada, about whether or not sex ed should include information about the skills required for a healthy marriage. Get teens thinking about that a little bit young. That's coming up just in a few moments here on Afternoons on News Talk 770. I'm Andrew Lawton.
News. It can happen anywhere.